Again, thank you very much for your patience and a very warm welcome to this ASP side event on workplace culture at the International Criminal Court, Strengthening Wellbeing and Accountability. It's organized by the Women's Initiatives for Gender Justice and the International Federation for Human Rights. And we're very pleased that we have 8 co-hosted states: Australia, Austria, Canada, Czech Republic, South Africa, Sweden, Switzerland, and the United Kingdom, and we really appreciate your support. My name is Danya, Chaikel, and I am the FIDH representative to the ICC. I'm honored to moderate this important session, and I'm here with Alix, who is the Executive Director of Women's Initiatives. Just to let you know, there is interpretation today in French. And for your information, and the reason we were slightly delayed is that we are being live streamed, and the event is also being recorded so that we can show this later online. ICC staff have been invited, and we very much hope that many are tuning in. So let's begin, and I would like to invite His Excellency Dr. Greg French, the Ambassador to Australia, to the Netherlands, for brief opening remarks. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and Excellencies, distinguished guests. It's a real privilege to welcome you to this important discussion, and I'd also like to acknowledge and thank our co-hosts, Austria, Canada, Czech Republic, South Africa, Sweden, Switzerland, the United Kingdom, the International Federation for Human Rights, and the Women's Initiatives for Gender Justice. This event underscores that a healthy, respected, and supported workforce is essential for the court. Bridging gaps between policy and practice, ensuring fairness, embedding victim-centred approaches in the court's internal accountability mechanisms are not optional. These steps are vital to ensure trust, to foster accountability, and to ensure the ICC can continue to deliver on its mandate of delivering justice for victims and upholding the highest standards of integrity. After all, at the core of the court and its mandate are people. And in this context, I think it's important to say that, of course, having a workplace culture of fairness, of well-being, of accountability is a challenge for all institutions, all human institutions, which are fallible because we are fallible. And reflecting on the challenge in this context, thinking of my own organisation, the Australian Foreign Ministry, we have our challenges, we have had our challenges. We have looked into issues, for example, of gender equality and seen that there are significant challenges there. And we acknowledge those challenges. We have made significant progress towards gender parity at all levels in our organisation now, made really strong progress, but serious issues remain, including around behaviours, including around respect for every person, irrespective of their level, irrespective of where they come from, who they are, what they believe, whom they love. So the point there is that all of us face these challenges in our organisations. It's not unique to this court, but it is important. This is the context within which we need to do things together to work with the court to ensure those improvements. And just a personal reflection as well, because in the end, these kind of things start at home. And I think as a man who is in a relatively powerful position compared with most colleagues, I need to reflect about times when I have not allowed my colleagues the space to be the best people they can be. And I think that honesty with yourself, when you have failed as a person, to live up to the goals is important as well when we are trying to work as institutions and organisations to help other organisations to become better. So by strengthening workplace culture, we not only strengthen the court, but also the confidence of the international community in our shared pursuit of justice. So we very much welcome and look forward to discussion today, hearing from participants how to ensure that we can all contribute to fostering a workplace grounded in respect, accountability, and well-being. So thank you and welcome.
Thank you so much, Ambassador French, for your especially candid and open remarks and continued support on this issue. I'd like to now turn to Victoria Wagner, the head of Unit for International Criminal Law and Anti-Corruption from the Austrian Foreign Ministry, for your opening remarks. Thank you.
welcome, colleagues, to this important event. First of all, I want to say that I regret that the Austrian ambassador, Bert Thuy, cannot be here. He is just with our deputy minister, and he asked me to speak on his behalf. As all of you know, workplace culture and accountability for misconduct is a priority for him, and as it is for me. I have been introduced. I'm working at the legal department of the Austrian Foreign Ministry. I'd like to thank the organizers for organizing this important event and also the co-hosting countries. So a positive workplace culture and accountability for misconduct at the ICC is a priority for Austria. We think that the ICC is a symbol for justice and accountability, so it also has to live these principles within. But we have the feeling that that there is a lot of thought given to a positive workplace culture now, and we welcome that from the independent expert review of 2021, many recommendations have been implemented. Some are still outstanding, but we hope and we believe that you are currently working on those. As Ambassador French from Australia said, a positive workplace culture and how to deal with misconduct is an issue in all of our organizations. It is a process, and I, just as Ambassador French, I want to share a little bit of you from my experience at the Austrian Foreign Ministry. I've been working there for 20 years, and when I started, I met a lot of inspiring colleagues, but there were also some high-level colleagues who had kind of a reputation. And at that time, it felt like if you worked in one of those teams, you just had to put up with it. You had to put up with difficult superiors, and you didn't really have the feeling as there was someone or a procedure that you could use if you were really unhappy. I'm happy to report that today many things have changed at the Austrian Foreign Ministry. And I think the most important thing was a realization at the top of the ministry that we want to be an attractive employer, for one, but also that employees perform much better if they are happy in their workplace, if they're treated with respect, if they feel that their work is that they can do a good job in the environment. And I think when I thought about it, there were three things that happened. So one thing was that there were clear rules at all levels what behavior is appropriate. And now we also, all of our kind of superiors, they have to undergo standardized feedback at regular intervals. So basically we employees can judge them. And the results of these standardized feedback does have consequences. So the second point is that there are clear consequences for misconduct, and I'm not only talking about severe misconduct like sexual harassment, but also treating the employees without respect. That's also something that that kind of the top level doesn't want to see anymore. And the third thing is that there are mechanisms for protecting witnesses and victims. So those are the 3 points, and it all works top down. And of course, not everything is perfect, but I and my colleagues, we can see a process and progress, and that really makes us happy. So, but I don't want to steal more time. I'm looking forward to hearing from the expert, as are you, and thanks for organizing this important event. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Victoria, and to Austria, and for sharing such a positive example of best practice. It's a great way to start the session. And I'm now going to invite Alix to provide some context for today's discussion with the panel.
Thank you very much, Danya, and also on my behalf, a very warm welcome to today's discussion. We meet at a time, it hasn't escaped any one of us, where the court is under tremendous external pressure, and that makes it even more important for us all to look inwards. Institutions withstand external threats where their internal culture is strong, when people feel respected, safe, and supported. As Ambassador French said and Ms. Wagner said before me, it's true for any institution. It's true for my institution, and I'm sure it's true for all of your respective institutions as well. Today we'll look at how the ICC's own internal environment shapes its capacity to carry out its mandate. We'll do that with colleagues, very deeply respected and expert colleagues, who understand this landscape from multiple angles. We just heard from representatives of states. We're very happy to have the head of the Internal Oversight Mechanism with us. We have the OTP Gender Equality Focal Point with us, and we have two former special advisors to the prosecutor with deep expertise on working climate, on sexual harassment, discrimination, but also gender-based violence, as well as civil society organizations such as FIDH and the women's initiatives, who have been committed to the International Criminal Court since its very early days. All of us share something important here today. We deeply care about this institution, and enough to confront very difficult truths with seriousness and with honesty. And let me state this, none of us are blind to how painful this discussion is, how painful this topic is and has become. Many have asked, why do you insist on raising the topic? Why do you organize this side event, given the political climate, given your knowledge that this will be politicized? Very understandable concerns. We hear them very clearly. But avoiding this conversation will not protect the court. The ICC's legal authority comes from the Rome Statute. Its moral authority comes from organizational integrity. As Ambassador French and Ms. Wagner said, no global public institution is insulated from these problems, but the stakes are particularly high with the ICC. So with that, alongside Women's Initiatives for Gender Justice, FIDH has been monitoring this issue and many others since the very beginning of the court. And I want to take a moment to say, Danya, you've been a very steady, principled voice throughout the years on this topic, with staunch advocacy and insistence on transparency. So I would like to invite you now to tell us what that underpins for you. Thank you.
Thank you, Alix. And of course, I have to start by also thanking you for your continued leadership and close collaboration on these, I would say, very difficult issues for many years now. And I want to pick up on something you said. And you know, they are extremely difficult. They're taboo for many people. But if we don't talk about it, we know that the cost of it is far greater for staff and actually for the court as a whole. And what we, if we step back, what we're seeing is that the gap between the policy and practice, between how the court presents itself publicly and how staff, many staff that we speak to, is unmistakable. There is a gap. And we see this from multiple sources. We definitely speak to, I have worked at the court many years ago, but we speak directly to former colleagues and current colleagues now. Of course, we look at the oversight findings of the IOM, and we see it very clearly in the recent staff survey. Despite the IER report, years of strategies, policies, new trainings, which are commendable and are a sign of very positive direction and intent, the simple truth is that the confidence in these reporting systems for misconduct allegations, it still remains low. And fear of retaliation remains widespread. Staff are saying that when they come forward, nothing or little happens, and sometimes the situation even worsens. And the confidence in leadership to act on survey results is weak across the court, and especially low in the OTP, in the Office of the Prosecutor. So these are not isolated frustrations. They're really structural warning signs, and that's why we felt today was so important to focus on the issues. And we also note that the IOM in the latest annual report reports an unprecedented increase of reports of alleged misconduct, including, of course, what the issues that they cover, harassment, discrimination, and abuse of authority. And we don't think this is only because suddenly people are aware of the reporting system or because they're suddenly more sensitive to misconduct. We do think it's evidence of systemic problems that just haven't been resolved yet. There's been a lot of attempts, and as I said, great intents and attempts, but unfortunately, things haven't improved, and in some cases, maybe worsening. And when we see elected officials, including judges and the prosecutor, facing allegations of misconduct, but without clear and transparent processes for the public and sometimes even staff for accountability, the damage for trust is really profound. So for me, I really see this, the central issue, it's transparency and candor. So that is what is critical right now. Without clear information about the full scale of the problems, including the procedural status of investigations and the substantive scope of them, which don't touch on anything confidential, rumors and speculation can really grow, and that's exactly what we are seeing right now, and we all know that. An ICC that cannot guarantee psychological safety for its own staff, it becomes a lot harder to demonstrate to victims and survivors that they will be safe when they work and engage with the court. And that is an awful and very uncomfortable truth, but we feel we have to face it. So it's not only a question of staff well-being, it really goes to the very heart of the court's mandate and ability to perform and carry out investigations and prosecutions. But that's not why we're here. We're here to actually focus on the solutions. We need to reflect on the status quo, but we need to focus, the main focus today is to really look forward and what concrete steps can make a real difference. Of course, a lot of steps have been taken, but more dedicated expertise, resources, and initiatives that are properly implemented and consistently and transparently, that are also applied, we want to emphasize, really consistently for staff and elected officials, such as the excellent new 360-degree feedback tool. So what we've been calling for is a full, honest evaluation of the court's workplace culture framework, including independent assessments of specific offices or policies. 2, a confidential, trusted complaint mechanism for misconduct by elected officials, with very clear communication around procedure and safeguards. And finally, which I don't know if we'll have time to talk much about today, but the real focus that we have also is on elections and making sure that the vetting, the due diligence process, hopefully we'll get to it a bit, can be really a broader tool to ensure that candidates with demonstrated integrity, management skills, and ethical leadership enter senior positions. So just to end, I mean, if we fail at these goals, the consequences are very predictable. Staff will burn out, they will leave, victims and survivors will lose trust, and states will begin to really question the credibility of the court. And going back to Alix's initial point, it becomes even more vulnerable to attacks, threats, sanctions, if you don't have a robust staff. So I think why we called this meeting is to really have an honest reflection today on how to build and come up with some actionable points on how to build a more resilient staff and court. So today is hopefully a really useful conversation. We're very grateful to all the speakers, and apologies for taking so much time in the beginning. We're very much looking forward to your presentations, and I will turn now to Alix.
Thank you very much, Danya. Indeed, very grateful to our experts here on the panel. If I may perhaps ask you to introduce yourselves before we turn to your presentations. Purna, may I perhaps start with you? If you could perhaps introduce yourself, please, and indicate your interest in and engagement on these topics.
All right.
Thank
Very
you.
briefly, thank you for that. I'm Purna. I was, until earlier this year, Special Advisor to the Prosecutor on workplace climate. In particular, my experience has been around working on sexual harassment and abuse of authority. While at UN Women, I wrote the international guidelines on how this area of work should be progressed on policy, and in other matters. I've worked on issues of violence against women for I don't know how many decades, and race equality for a long time, particularly interested in the links between human rights, violence against women, and organizational change. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, Purna, for being with us. Let me stay to my left. Claire, may I ask you to introduce yourself? Thank you.
Thank you, and thank you for inviting me to this very important discussion. I am Claire Sabatini. I am the gender focal point for the Office of the Prosecutor, and I've been in that position for over a year now. I'm interested in this topic because I believe that a healthy workplace culture is essential for the court to fulfill its mandate, and because I'm a staff member at the OTP, and I know firsthand the struggles that staff are experiencing. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Claire. Kim, may I then now turn to you, please? Thank you. Yep, that one, this one. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Thuy Seelinger, and I teach at the Schools of Public Health and the School of Law at Washington University in St. Louis in the United States. I was, as was introduced, I was previously a special advisor to the prosecutor on sexual violence and conflict from 2021 to 23, and then I joined staff as senior coordinator on gender-based crimes and crimes against and affecting children from 2023 till April of 2025 when I stepped down and returned to my faculty position. I have, as a lawyer, represented survivors of gender-based violence in a number of contexts, either what they suffer at home or in the context of war or in the context of detention. And then as an academic, I study their needs for support and justice and how they experience the legal systems that they encounter. I care about this panel deeply because I believe fully in every person's right to health and safety. And after spending 2 years on staff with the Office of the Prosecutor colleagues, it is with great sort of affection and desire for their own well-being that I am happy to be part of the conversation, and will share some understanding of some of the challenges, although I want to limit my comments to contexts that we can learn from outside of the OTP. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you very much, Kim. Silvain, over to you. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So I am Silvain, and I am the head of the Independent Oversight Mechanism, which is the subsidiary body of the Assembly with the mandate of providing comprehensive oversight of the court through investigations, evaluation, but also inspections. So, while I believe that workplace culture is the primary responsibility of the court, I believe that the IOM has a critical role to play in it, and this is the reason why I got really interested in this panel and these discussions, so I can also share the challenges of the IOM, but also the perspective from the IOM side. So I'm looking forward to the discussions this afternoon. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Silvain. And again, thank you to all of our panelists for joining us.
Thank you all very much. I'd like to turn to you first, Purna. Across international organizations, we see recurrent patterns, outdated hierarchies and power imbalances, fear of retaliation, weak trust in reporting systems, and gaps, as I mentioned earlier, between written policies and lived realities. So we were wondering if you could help us understand what behaviors within institutions allow this kind of unhealthy workplace culture to persist, and of course, how can we break these unhealthy patterns?
Thank you, Danya, for the question, and thanks to all those on the panel for this conversation, and to those in the room. And for those not in the room, I understand some are online, and I hope there'll be a way in which you can engage in this conversation, either today or from today onwards, as today is neither the start nor the end of the work we are all invested in. I want to reiterate the commitment to the court that others have already made. Our investment in the court is not only in the work it does in the world, but in it being the best it can be to produce the best work it can produce, which requires a functioning, effective workplace. There is a question of rights to safety and freedom from abuse and harassment in the workplace. There's a simple question of how well can people work if they're operating in what the IER and the ad hoc panel have called a culture of fear, in structures of extreme hierarchy. And I think if we're seriously to have this conversation in a meaningful way, there's two areas which we must name and focus on. One is to explicitly talk about power, how it operates, who has it, what can be done about it, why is it so unquestioned in institutions and organizations such as the ICC, but beyond in other IGOs also. And secondly, the centrality of the knowledge and experience and wisdom unfortunately gained by survivors and victims. And I want to come back to that shortly. First of all, Dan, you talk about outdated power structures, but my concern is they are prevalent today. And so maybe in some way, theoretically, they might be outdated, but they are absolutely current. And the dangers of such rigid hierarchy and such unquestioned concentrations of power as we see in these organizations. You know, I've worked in the UN, I've worked with a number of other IGOs to address these issues of abuse of authority, and particularly sexual and racial discrimination and harassment, that it is not unusual. Status counts for so very much in these organizations, and it's extremely challenging for somebody to say to their superior is quite an interesting word anyway, but to their senior, I disagree, or I think you're doing it this wrong way, or even I have something to contribute here. It's not an easy thing to do. And it's often something that meets with adverse consequences. So if power is concentrated, it's unquestioned and it's unquestionable, then that provides a massive space for those who are holding power to abuse it. So I'm interested in how it is that that power can be dispersed and can reside more fully with those in more junior positions or in more junior locations. So I'm talking about even outside HQ to what in the ICC is called field offices. I'm interested in how different vectors of inequality, so how power is distributed between grades, across race, across sex, how they interact and how they play out in the workplace. The IER and the ad hoc panel's reports both gave us sufficient material to see this is not a one-dimensional issue. It is not a unique problem with one or two cases. I know the current crisis is particularly about one case, but it is not a cultural issue that is confined in and contained by one case. That means the issue is much broader. And I'd like us to think about even the language we use, which minimizes and, to my view, obfuscates what the problems are. We talk about unacceptable behavior. We talk about prohibited conduct. We talk about lots of different things, but we have to say this is sexual harassment. We have to say this is assault. We have to say this is racial discrimination. No organization which has a mandate to pursue justice, to end those things in the world, can tolerate their existence within the organization. And that's a discrepancy we currently see. The common response in many organizations, especially IGOs, but also other organizations, is to reach for what I call the 3 Ps. And that is to say, this behavior is prohibited, we've got a policy, and here's a procedure for dealing with it. Quick and easy go-to solutions. but they're not solutions. They're slogans. Nobody talks about whether those policies are fit for purpose. Who put them together? How are they monitored? Who reviews them? Whose voices are part of that review? Where are victims and survivors in this discussion? They are the ones who know best what's wrong with those policies, procedures, and systems. They are the ones who know best why they won't use them. If their knowledge, if their participation in these discussions is missing, we will never get it right. You talked also about why systems aren't trusted. I'm quite struck at how often I hear that sort of expression that says, what can we do to get victims to trust the procedures? It's the wrong question. The question needs to be, how do we build systems and procedures that are worthy and have the confidence of people using them? We're not doing that. Once again, victims and survivors who've tried to use them and people who have decided not to use them can tell us why they aren't working. We know. Those of us who listen to and sit down with and pay attention to victims and survivors can tell you why that's not working as their advocates, but they are the ones who know. We can channel their knowledge, we can channel their participation, but we have to look to them for the answers. And I think in institutions that have very rigid systems of hierarchy and power, the victim and the survivor, somebody who's been abused, somebody who's have been hurt and harmed, is often seen as vulnerable and weak, and therefore of no significance in the organization. So I think we need to talk about and understand our peers and our colleagues, and those in most junior grades who are most likely to be abused with, in the exercise of power and authority within it. They are the ones who have to enjoy a greater status. So I would say that we need to come back to power, how it operates, how it's vested, who has it. And I would say anybody who has power has the potential to abuse it. We have to start from that position. The greater power they have, the greater potential there is for abuse. So I think there needs to be ownership of change and identification of problems at lower, dispersed, and organized levels of staff, workers, and victims and survivors, many of whom will not report but will actually leave the organization. And the organization may wash its hands and say that problem's over when actually the culture and the systems and the structures are still there and cause problems. I would like to see movement towards reflexivity about the holding and use of power. I was very interested to hear Ambassador French say that he had reflected on his own behavior. I would like to see much more of that. I think the task is about giving away power, being comfortable with being able to share it. That means having different systems of decision-making, of ownership of policy, of its review, of its discussion, of its revision. I'd like to see legitimacy given to those who are the most powerless to participate and change. And I'd like to see, I know you're talking about elected officials, but for all senior positions, I'd like to see questions asked in recruitment, which are, what will you do with the power you have that we invest in you in this organization? How will you use it for good? How can we monitor you? And what initiatives will you take to ensure you don't misuse it? How will you respond to a case where an allegation of sexual harassment arises on your watch? What is your inclination? I think we have to ask those hard questions, and I think we have to be watchful of our colleagues also in the organizations where we work. Danya, I have so much more to say, but perhaps I should stop now. We can come back to anything.
That's exactly 10 minutes.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Purna. Yeah, thank you, and we will come back, absolutely. I'm going to turn to you now, Silvain. As we touched on earlier, your latest annual report shows a sharp rise in misconduct reports. And while, however, the IOM continues to operate with limited resources. How do you understand these figures, and what do they tell us about the court's internal climate?
Yeah, thank you very much. As you said, there has been a significant increase this year compared to last year and also compared to previous years, where you can see an increase of more than 75% of the cases, going from 43 cases last year by this time to 76. Of course, there are explanations about it. It's not one single explanation to this. I think, and as we all know, in this domain, there has been always some sort of underreporting of the matters. But what I can say is there has been also some work done by the IOM to contribute to awareness raising. Me stepping in as the new head of IOM, I have been engaging in, also with staff in the field, staff in HQ, and I remember Purna was just mentioning about people also in the field, and trying also to reach out to them and to tell them that the IOM is here, the IOM is for them, the IOM is for the staff. Obviously, not all allegation, not even every single allegation is considered misconduct, but be it misconduct or managerial issue or HR issue, is a problem. And it's a problem, and it needs intervention, and it needs to be fixed. Of course, when it's come to IOM, the fundamental problem is, as you mentioned in your question, the resources issue. You could see from the workplace, the survey, workplace survey, that there's a tremendous pressure on the IOM staff. 100% of the IOM staff says that they're feeling being under pressure because of the workload. If I can take a very quick example, my investigators has been working on average 20 to 30 cases. It's huge. Of course, it has also, even for them, a workplace culture issue, because this pressure is untenable, but also it has an impact on the time frames. And you are having affected individuals, but also subject, you're having their cases hanging. This has a huge impact on their well-being. So this is something that, of course, is a great concern for me as a new head. I have been putting in place measures to try to adjust and also do the best, find alternative solutions to be able to continue to cope, but at some point it might not be tenable. So, yeah, to answer your question, it's a problem. And yeah, the greatest solution will be to increase the IOM capacity.
Thank you for explaining the numbers. And I wanted to ask you another question, something much more positive. The annual report also describes 2 recent advancements, which might not be that well known to the public at least, but even to staff and others. And one is very important to the work NGOs have been doing. It's the I can't say it. I can't say the word. Well, anyway, making operational the due diligence process, or what we call the vetting process, apologies, for elected officials. And there will also be ad hoc panels in the future. It will be a permanent process, or there will be a group of individuals that are ready to be on an ad hoc panel for future investigations of elected officials. So those are 2 advancements. And we were hoping you could share a little bit more information, first about the ad hoc panels, how they will operate, and why states decided to take this extra step.
Thank you. The establishment of the ad hoc panel, I think, stems from the the independent expert review report we call IR report. And I think it came from the suggestion by some elected officials that the IOM should not be the entity investigating elected officials. But at that time, the IOM had the full mandate through the rules of procedure and evidence, but also in its operational mandate, it is the only body that should be investigating also the elected officials. So basically, the recommendation, which is the recommendation 108, says basically that the IOM should retain investigative panels to look into allegations against judges, prosecutors, judges and prosecutors. This recommendation was subject to lengthy discussions, I think, since 2022, and to the extent that the recommendation was assessed positively, but with a limited scope. And that limited scope was to say, there will be other panels, there will be a panel, but that panel will not have the investigative mandate. It will have the mandate, the advisory mandate, which basically says, after the investigation by an independent office like mine, like the IOM, the report will go to that panel, and that panel will then legally characterize the facts established by the IOM. Clarifying whether or not the facts can amount to serious misconduct or misconduct of less serious nature, and advising the different decision makers. So basically, this is what is on the table. It has been approved by the Bureau. It will go to the Assembly for adoption. The terms of references have been finalized, and all the corresponding legal frameworks, like the operational mandate of the IOM, the rules of procedure and evidence, but also the rules of procedure of the Assembly will be amended to that it will allow this panel to work. So this is what I can briefly say about the panel. No, and again, it is, in my view, it's an important step.
Thank you very much. And I just wanted to ask you, because we still have a little bit more time, as I mentioned, civil society was very active for years to address several shortcomings in elections, besides what we found out to be frequent vote trading and other troubling aspects of the elections at the ICC. There was a complete lack of any vetting, even criminal record checks, and for the first time at any international justice mechanism, we're very, very pleased by this big development that now there's a permanent due diligence process, and that is becoming operational now. But we're wondering if you could speak for a couple of minutes on the fact that it is focusing, however, on sort of filtering out the worst candidates, those who don't have a high moral character. But how do we actively identify the strongest leaders in this process? How could this due diligence process be strengthened to ensure that those in senior positions meet the highest standards of conduct and integrity?
So as you already pointed out on the flag, the due diligence apply to all elected officials, judges, prosecutor, deputy prosecutors, registrar and deputy registrar. And the aim is to ensure that the candidates for these important positions possess high moral character. And this is a requirement of the Rome Statute. The due diligence has three main components, if I can speak like that. First, we have the background checks. It's normal vettings for anybody. So we have the background checks going through the academic records, professional records, also looking at the social media used by the candidates, open source material, also the criminal records. But it goes beyond that, and this is the importance of this due diligence. There is a proactive process of gathering information on the candidates. This is through, for instance, the interview with the colleagues of the candidates, the peers, the subordinates, but also superiors, former and current ones, so that we can gather enough information on them. And then the third component is having a mechanism to receive and review allegations of misconduct. In that, I think that it's a robust process that will allow at least to have this kind of serious vetting and make sure that those that we are getting are people of high moral character. So the process has been already been applied in the past, and we are moving to something more permanent. It wouldn't be ad hoc anymore. But of course, there are challenges and there are gaps, and that needs to be filled. First of all, I think that for me, it is the access to information. If you want to make sure that you get the right people, you need to have a timely and full access to information. And in that, the cooperation of states is key. It's key, and this will be a message that I will be passing tomorrow, but also in the days to come, in all the discussions within the Bureau and also in the working groups, to ensure that the IOM is able to swiftly and timely access information. In many cases, we are confronted with privacy laws in the countries, and we need to make sure that if you put a candidate forward, you should be able to assist and help getting the required information, so we can give the guarantee that we have the right person. I think that goes with also some sort of awareness for the states. I think that not many people, not many states, many people understand what this due diligence is about. And in that, I think that the civil society is a partner and can help disseminating this due diligence process. But beyond just disseminating the concept, is also allowing also a wider dissemination of the secure channel that we will be opening to receive the complaints, because this channel should be accessible to a large public, so that at least there is more chances that people can come forward with information. So basically, that's what I could say. And of course, the key is that there is a resource gap. And because this is becoming an art of one, there needs to be someone dedicated exclusively to this due diligence process, because it is important. And it's important, and we need to give it the necessary capacity to be able to produce good results.
Thank you very much, Silvain. Very well noted. Thank you as well, Danya. Let me now turn to Claire. Claire, the OTP has now several initiatives on gender, well-being, on conduct. Many staff yet report uneven implementation. Female staff may report having more negative experiences than men. Can you tell us a little bit about the barriers that you see that might prevent these policies from becoming a part of daily practice? Thank you.
Thank you. I want to acknowledge what you just said about the fact that the ICC indeed has this very robust framework, everything from an AI on discrimination, harassment, and abuse of authority to policy on protection from sexual exploitation and abuse, whistleblowing policy. The list really goes on, and I think, as Danya said in her opening remarks, this shows steps in the right direction. This shows commitment to tackling these issues, but absolutely there are barriers that persist, and I would break these barriers down into two categories. We have practical barriers to the implementation, and then we have more systemic. So I'll speak on the practical barriers. Before I engaged in the court's policy framework as the OTP gender focal point, I had limited knowledge of the court's existing policies, and I think that probably many colleagues would be in the same boat. Unless you're directly facing an issue covered by one of the policies, you likely have a limited knowledge of that. And I think that that speaks to a need to enhance the introduction, the communication, and the implementation of the policies. We also have many stakeholders in the court working on well-being, working on gender equality. In the OTP alone, we have several committees, and I think we could really utilize all of these stakeholders to help implement the policies. Some concrete examples would be to enhance targeted trainings that cover real life scenarios that you would experience in your day-to-day work at the court. Another could be creative communication in terms of producing videos that explain the policies and their key points. Another idea could be to have the policies accessible in a more digestible format, FAQs, policy briefers. There's really so much that could be done to allow staff to get the information that they need without having to sit down and read the entire policy. Aside from the fact that, of course, at the court you have many people with a legal background, but you have many people who don't have a legal background. And so these initiatives to make the policies more accessible could bridge that gap. Ultimately, if there's a more proactive approach to the implementation, then we would help ensure that staff, including leadership, would feel equipped to handle an issue when it arises, rather than scrambling to then understand one's rights, duties, and responsibilities in respect to a certain policy. So that's the practical side. But the more pressing side, I would say, that impacts the practical side is the systemic issues. Policies alone cannot change culture. We see this in any policy setting. They're important, don't get me wrong, but they need to act in tandem with efforts, intentional efforts to shift the status quo of the culture. We can have policies that protect staff from retaliation, but if we have a culture of fear, how can we expect those policies to make a difference? We can adopt core values of integrity and fairness, but if it's done within a culture of opacity and intense hierarchy, those values remain aspirational. We can commit to gender equality, we can have an OTP gender focal point, a court-wide gender focal point, a registry gender focal point, but if entrenched patriarchal norms continue to shape interactions, decision-making, and power dynamics, then those commitments do not translate into practice. So policy development, as I said, has to go hand in hand with intentional efforts to shift the status quo. And I would say that the court, being an extremely top-down institution, I think that change and that intentional effort needs to start at the highest levels of leadership. And I would say that if we could adopt in the highest levels of leadership feminist leadership principles like transparency and sharing power that Purna mentioned, self-awareness would be another one, then we could see a change. But without a commitment from the top, any attempt to reform will struggle to take hold, and staff will continue to operate according to the unspoken rules rather than the written policies.
Thank you very much, Claire. Very clear. May I ask, you mentioned very clearly the need for intentional efforts to shift the status quo, and you mentioned adopting feminist principles and values at the highest level. Can I ask you to either elaborate a little bit on that, but I do know that some of our other speakers may also talk to that, and or do you have any recommendations for high-level impact changes that could be made right now to improve day-to-day life?
So in a way, the changes that could be made are simple and yet also complicated because they are connected to culture. But if we talk about transparency and sharing power, When I think about sharing power, I think about how knowledge is power. I think about how knowledge is shared within the institution, and that happens through trickling through the layers of leadership rather than direct communication to staff and with staff, where staff can actually have a dialogue about decisions that are being undertaken or considered, where they can raise questions and concerns, and where leadership can answer those questions and concerns on the spot. As OTP Gender Focal Point, I had the opportunity to hold briefings with staff, collect their questions and concerns with full knowledge that I would not be able to answer every question in that moment, but I would try and I would go back and find the answer if I could and provide it as soon as possible. We have this tendency of opacity and leaning towards not sharing information, even when it's not confidential and there's no real pressing need not to. I think that if leadership were to lean into sharing information that can be shared, it would make a huge, huge difference. So it's simple in the sense that it could really be the matter of emails. It could be the matter of more town halls. It could be the matter of holding a session where leadership listens to staff questions and concerns. We have an excellent staff union council, but that should not replace direct communication with staff. Thank you.
Very clear. Thank you very much, Claire. Kim, if I may turn to you now. Critical aspect of workplace culture is creating a sense of safety and accountability. Accountability itself requires nuance to avoid misconceptions, that when it comes to misconduct, there is either zero consequence or zero tolerance, the latter of which is often assumed to equal automatic termination. Could you talk a little bit from your experience in academic institutions and your research or related research, what you have learned about this relationship between workplace culture and accountability? Thank you.
Thanks, Alix. I'm happy to. The good and the bad thing about being the last speaker is I think many of the things I would like to have said have been said and covered quite well, but I'll take the opportunity to maybe follow up on some things colleagues have shared. I mean, workplace culture is obviously, it's what arises from an organization's values and beliefs and behaviors. And then accountability are the expectations we set at the individual and the collective level for how we do our jobs, right, and meet our organizational goals and standards. And you can imagine the relationship, a healthy workplace engenders staff health and confidence and commitment to the work, loyalty to the team. We see time and time again in the evidence, what you probably already know, right? When you're part of a good team and you feel valued and respected, you work harder, you go the extra mile, you feel more content, more satisfaction, even given constraints and limitations on promotion and things like that. Conversely, a negative workplace culture, one that's not healthy or doesn't have trust or open communication, it suffers in terms of efficiency, it suffers in terms of the quality of work and higher levels of staff disengagement and dissatisfaction, less longevity in the work. And listening to what you were saying earlier, there is that joke almost, right? How culture eats policy for breakfast, right? We can have all the policies, the beautiful documents in the world, but if we aren't equipped as an environment to implement, they will absolutely go nowhere. And so, actually, and I told myself I wouldn't speak about the OTP specifically. I'm no longer on staff. Many things may have changed since I left. But I will say it reminds me of other contexts in which I've worked, including academic institutions, where you have an overarching workplace culture, of course, but there are microcultures within any large organization also. And I'll speak from the university, we have departments, we have sub-departments, we have different teams that have very different feels because of the leadership at sort of micro and meso levels also. And that counts for a lot. And I think one thing that is relevant at the OTP, and I saw it, is that we have different cultures among our teams and units also. And there are some that are doing things that, whether they realize it or not, are quite evidence-based in terms of really strong and inclusive leadership. And I think those things we should acknowledge and really celebrate in any institution and draw from them and try to replicate them and share them. So some of the things that, in at least the literature around organizational psychology and employment culture that we know work, right, are having clear expectations and communication, both internal communication and external communication, having a symmetry of communication, so it's not only messaging that comes from leadership and senior members of a team, but also that there is a channel for symmetrical and sort of responsive communication going throughout the court or the organization in many different directions. You need trust and empowerment. Of course, people have to be trusted and resourced to do their job and have some autonomy in their decision making. They need to be able to take ownership and get credit for their work and be acknowledged in whatever ways are possible, which is tied to having a recognition and a reward system for good work. Right, we're talking a lot about discipline and punitive accounts, which have their place and are important to have. But I think even more important is really looking for when we can spotlight the behavior we want to model and the behavior that makes us proud of the work that we do. This includes growth and development opportunities. In some institutions, mobility is more possible and more fluid, right? We know in the court it's a very steeply triangular organization, and promotion is quite difficult structurally. That doesn't mean that people can't have promotional feeling, right, and development opportunities, whether it's through external engagements, whether it's seeing what people really care about in order to build their skill set and feel that they're developing in ways that they want for their longer term professional goals. All of this is doable even within the constraints of a deeply narrow or hierarchical system. And inclusive leadership, of course, when leaders demonstrate ethical and inclusive behavior, do the type of self-reflection, Purna, you noted, and you've all noted from Ambassador French's comments, and that we've seen from leaders like him, not just when he's on stage, actually, but when you're working with him on the side, and leading by example, showing a tone of respect. There are evidence-based practices in other industries, right? And we don't have a lot of time to go into them, but I just wanted to highlight just a couple very briefly. Okay, this one may seem a little bit strange, but look at the aviation industry, right? We think it has nothing to do with the work that we do. But aviation, like other types of transport, where human error can be incredibly fatal, right, in an instant, has had to really reckon with how it deals with hierarchy. And you were talking, Purna, about power. There are different kinds of power in any organization. There's hierarchy and formal power, there's informal power, there's something people refer to as demographic power, the power of numbers, there's expert power. Power manifests in many ways. The aviation industry is littered with hugely fatal accidents that resulted because of the rigidity of power many, many decades ago. You think about 1977, the most fatal airplane crash in history, which involved the Dutch airline, actually KLM. But it was a terrible, terrible incident. I think 583 people died on the island of Tenerife because of many things, including a miscommunication that was not detected by the senior captain, but was detected by a junior engineer who raised it and wasn't heeded because of the way hierarchy and power work. This is 1977, it's almost 50 years ago. But as a result of that crash and others that were in the near time frame, late 1970s, they had to develop a crew resource management training that now is mandatory for all airplane pilots, where the details are not important for us, but the point was it had to address how you balance retaining hierarchical command and leadership, but make it absolutely possible and the expectation that junior members of a team have equal input and can raise concerns and raise observations when they think a mistake is being made. If we don't have that type of culture in an institution, if people from any role in an institution can't raise their hand and ask a question or express a concern, we have a trap that our own hierarchy sets up for us. So that's one example from what might seem to be a very different industry. The other comment I was thinking about listening to my colleagues on the panel was, we've mentioned training a little bit, and I think we all know at this point that training is not a panacea for anything, and there's good training, there's better training, and there's terrible training. I guess my point with the training question is, the research really indicates that there are certain conditions under which training does have effect, right? Oftentimes it doesn't. When it is only focused on legal liability, it has almost no effect that we would want, especially when it concerns harassment. But when training is context-specific and tailored to the organization, like you were saying, Claire, it is much more effective. When the language makes sense to the audience, right? We talk in the language of hostile work environment. After sitting and listening to many of these cases, almost nobody who is committing these abuses is feeling hostile, right? The language doesn't land at all. We have to think about, move ourselves from potentially just the intention alone of the person who's committing the behavior to having staff think and imagine the impact and the possible discomfort that certain behaviors that might seem benign might still cause someone who's not you, right? Who is a different gender, different role in an organization, different age even. So I think shifting our training and making sure it's tailored, making sure the language actually resonates is really important. And so are the scenarios. Back at the university, I sit on the university-wide sexual harassment investigation board. All of our training scenarios come from the record, right? We have to change them so that they're not identifiable, and sometimes they're aggregations. But it's really important that we're not training on scenarios that don't make sense or don't seem realistic within the organization. We're not talking about, I'm sorry to be graphic, we're not necessarily talking about getting groped in the elevator. When we're talking about very subtle things sometimes in an organization, repeated invitations to get coffee, flowers on someone's desk when they've told you they don't want the flowers, things that I think can be quite difficult for someone to want to report because they worry that it's not crossing a line. But in fact, if it makes them uncomfortable, it is actually starting to get into the territory of a hostile work environment. So I think there's a lot more literature on what makes training important. The major takeaway, I think, is that training itself is never sufficient. It only works when it is part of a much broader institutional effort to address workplace issues. And they have to be mutually reinforcing, otherwise training becomes a checkbox exercise, as we know. There are a lot of other lessons about training. And the last thing I would just maybe mention on this question, Alix, is, so I mentioned that at the university I sit on the sexual harassment investigation board. I think there's a lot of change happening with IOM, with your leadership, Silvain, and the support you're getting and the interest from the States now too. It might be helpful to think about the way our board is constructed. It has participation from faculty, staff, and students from across the university, every single school, from medicine to law, public health. And there are about 50 or 60 of us actually on the board. And we have to undergo a half year of training before we get to touch a file, right? And the training is regular, it's every month. And we cross-train, we learn obviously the statutes, and we have to talk about effects of trauma, we have to develop skills, timelining, actual investigation skills. But what is really nice about it too is that then we recruit and bring other people into the roster over time. And you end up really mainstream a lot of this throughout every department, every part of the university, which I think is important, particularly looking at an organization like OTP too, where it can't just be the responsibility of a gender focal point, right? We really have to involve everyone across the staff. I'll stop there for now, thanks.
Thank you so much, Kim. And I didn't say that in the beginning, but I full I fully agree with this focus on highlighting excellent work that's being done with integrity. And I will mention that someone in the court, in a particular office, mentioned how wonderful their team is and how excellent the manager is. And I asked that. I said, is that being used as a good example to other offices? You know, and no, it isn't. So I fully agree that we need to shift the focus on how to build this safe, productive, happy environment, and that be the aim instead of the opposite. And looking, of course, at other industries that would show best practices where you don't expect them, I think is brilliant as well. And I wanted to give all of you a chance to respond to if there was a point that you heard from the other answers. This is a point of 1 or 2 minutes to, if you like, to make another reflection. And otherwise I can, or you can also answer what leadership behavior would have the greatest immediate impact in restoring trust and improving the daily working conditions. And Claire already answered that one, but I just wanted to give you all a chance to respond or think of something that would be a positive recommendation going forward. So maybe we'll start with you again, Purna, if that's all right.
Thank you, Danya, and thank you to the others on the panel who've really raised important issues and points today. Let me pick up a couple of things that have been said and add to them if I may, but stop me if I go on to them. First of all, on training. Training is often seen, as Kim said, as almost like a panacea. I'd include it in my first P of the 3 Ps, that under policy we commit to doing training and everybody has to do it, it's compulsory. But there's very little investigation as to what that training should look like and how impactful it is. And, you know, reviews of training around these issues have shown not only that they don't have impact in behavioural change, but they actually do damage. Like you were saying, Kim, that it's not received, it doesn't land in the way it needs to land. So some of the issues around training are about the language that's used, the framing that's given, but it's also about the necessity to look at those crucial dynamics in the organisation which have to be dismantled. It's not training about just saying, here's the policy, here's how you use it, here's who you go to report. It's actually having the right people who can do that fundamental work in a way that is productive rather than hostile to those in the room. It's very difficult. We have, when I was doing this work at the UN, I did issue some guidelines on revising training and what would make it effective, and have actually modelled that in a couple of international organisations. I want just to say a little bit more about victims and survivors. I know in a primarily legal organisation, the language and thinking of law informs almost everything it does. And across the UN and also at the ICC, the language of complainants, I think, is misplaced. I think those who whistleblow, those who tell us about abuse of authority, about sexual harassment and racial discrimination should be seen as an asset to the organisation. They are telling the organisation what's going wrong and giving them the opportunity to correct it. I would much rather we use the language of reporters who are helpful to the organisation and to whom there is an obligation of protection, of support, and of minimising harm. The experience of sexual harassment, we have to name what's going on in the court now, in the office. We can't ignore it in this discussion. The naming of those harms of harassment and of sexual abuse, they have to be part of the process. Harm is not only done to the person who's been the target of abuse, and who is hurt by prolonged processes, lack of information, irregular communication, the fear of losing their job, the fear of going back to work with the same person if the complaint is not upheld. All those are ongoing aspects of harm that we need to consider, but also harm is done to the organisation and to the teams and to the people who work with both the victim survivor and the alleged perpetrator. And I think the absence of communication and the denial of the possibility to speak about things, I know the case that was live when I was working at UN Women, we were told we couldn't even name the abuser. And there were a lot of young people who worked with him, interns, who were absolutely mortified by what had happened and who they'd been working with. There was no opportunity to go through that and work through it. answer the questions of how did he get here? How do we make sure it doesn't happen again? So I think let's be careful to separate confidentiality from secrecy. Secrecy is not part of transparency. Transparency will help to move us forward. And I'd currently say, you asked earlier why systems aren't trusted. I actually think reporting is an irrational act in most organizations. You don't know what's going to happen. You don't know how long it's going to take. You don't know if anybody's going to believe you. You don't know if there's going to be any positive outcome out of it. I mean, the list is very long, and I have started a list of it in these publications, which I'll wave in a moment. And lastly, in thinking of what comes next, I did set up a staff group when I was doing this work for the prosecutor, and their job was to take ownership, partly to pull together all these disparate strands you talked about, Claire, but also to lead and to guide the work across the organization. One of the things we talked about was where those good teams were, and using the managers and the staff from those teams to think about and disseminate what was working so that others might learn too, other managers too. But the last thing I want to say is that in terms of moving forward, I have previously suggested, and I'd like to do it again here, that there are 6 areas of work that are absolutely crucial to changing culture. One is about having leadership on board and the right type of messaging. One is about understanding and practicing zero tolerance, which does not mean a 1 or a 0 option. It means about never doing nothing when you know there is a report of abuse. And what that something you do looks like can vary. There's a massive menu of options. Thirdly, understand and embed victim-centered approaches. Don't just claim you do it. That requires work. Fourth, update training. We've already talked about training. I won't go into why. Fifth, which I think is really crucial, is to practice and promote collective ownership. This is not the responsibility of 1 or 2 or 3 people. It's not Claire's job to make cultural change. It's not any other focal point's job. Everybody has an investment in this because the work culture changes for everybody, and that benefits the organization and its mandate. Lastly, organizational transparency. Collect and share data. The fact that the IOM is having even more reports makes it easier to share that data. If you've only got 1 or 2, it's hard to protect confidentiality where it's needed. But the more you have, the more you can share. I just want to wave these 2. If they're any use, I think there will be in the work that goes forward. These 2 publications give a lot of guidance and provide standards around working towards ending sexual harassment. Thank you.
Thank you so much for those very clear and practical points, Purna. I'd just like to give the floor to Silvain for final thought as well.
I think it has been very, very interesting contributions, and I think when it comes to leadership, in my view, is lead by example, show the example. And when you lead by example, you are lifting all the others, and they will be following you, and they will be just complying with also with the standards that you are yourself upholding. This is what I can say.
And then it was Claire.
I guess I would just add, which I wanted to say when I was talking about simple steps that leadership could take. I think that there needs to be a shift in mindset where the staff are seen as valued partners rather than passive recipients of information. So I'll just end there. Thank you.
Wonderful. And Kim?
I was thinking about your question about what leadership behavior we need, and I think for me it's about transparent communication and like really empathetic listening to the staff. I think that is something that every organization needs, and I think the OTP is no exception. So yes, so let's work on that. Thank you.
Well, and I want to apologize that we have run out of time. We have 2 minutes, and we've been instructed to be very strict with the time because the next session will begin shortly. But on behalf of Alix Women's Initiatives for Gender Justice and the International Federation for Human Rights and the 8 states that sponsored this, co-hosted this event, we really want to thank you deeply for your candid, very helpful and useful remarks today. It's a difficult topic, but I felt that we did get somewhere further than we have in other discussions, and we still have a long way to go. And I think from now going forward, including more staff, including reporters, I will use that word now, and a broader group of experts who have experience from other. Yes, if we can be very short for a short statement, but we need to leave in 1 minute. Thank you. Can you speak more into the microphone? Thank you. Just go closer to the, yeah.
I hear the interventions, it convinces me that the limitations they bring to this debate shows exactly why we are here. The IMF have always been there. And as the ASP has said and we have said, they should be given a more robust mandate and resources. 2, we have the Office of the Ombudsman. 3, we have the staff union. And now, from your intervention, what is the definition of the workplace in the ICC? I've been to the field in northern Uganda, where I'm the Lake Council, Darfur, and for over 26 years on the territory in all international courts. I've been on the panel for recruitment and for discipline in many courts. I'm consulted. The structures exist. The problem is indiscipline. Nobody has investigated. We talk about cyber attacks, but the leaking of information from the ICC that has endangered the lives of people and proceedings. 2, the systemic racism that the ICC today does not reflect the face of the court that we intended. For over 20 years, they were in Africa, not even interns. We still look along the corridors. Although in the last 2 years, that we started seeing a few people from other places. Gender balance. When it resembles the face of the way we work at the United Nations, people from different cultures will bring their contributions. For example, about the sexual harassment. Do you look at what we call cultural sensitivity, the African aspect, these witnesses? So your definition of the workplace, limited to other office of prosecutor or a few things, without the staff union, without those who are working with witness protection, without translators, without key companies who meet the victims, the rare victims who are dying now, that bombs are firing on them, and people are leaking out information, and nobody's investigating, nobody's talking about it, endangering me, my staff, and others that take to the field, and destroying completely dismissing the role of law in conduct investigation. Empower the OMF. Make sure you give them enough resources, and outreach. The outreach of every court is one of the most important structures of the court. Special Court for Sierra Leone, I was there. The ICC outreach must be empowered. And there should be institutional dialogue. Somebody said communication, but we call it institutional dialogue. So that at every turn, different institutions can hit and others can meet and talk. And the staff will feel that at least they belong here and they participate and promote the staff who have been there, stagnant for 10 years. You bring people in and out, it becomes a recruiting ground for friends. No. It pains me because I lost my investigator in Malawi from the ICC because of leaking information. And the Rwanda Intelligence Service pursued him there and killed him. And it could happen here.
Thank you very much indeed for sharing your experience. And this is there are countless very important stories and views that need to be shared, and we need to have many more discussions like this. So I want to thank you very much for sharing this. Okay, I'm going to give, because, yes, go ahead.
Right, yes, thanks. Thanks, Danya. Since we were mentioned as the Staff Union Council, I'm here with my colleagues from the Staff Union Council, and we would like to contribute in a minute, since I know you're ending. And it was an interesting debate, and we have been saying and telling the states since 2019 for the workplace culture-related recommendations. And I tend to agree with your recommendations in the report as well, that we need a separate facilitation for workplace culture, where this sort of conversation we can have, because once a year is not enough. We need a constant engagement, constant monitoring entity, where we suggested to the review mechanism having an external entity, such as workplace culture facilitation, as well as an internal entity, and we know that the court is moving towards an ethics office, ethics function, that could actually do this monitoring. So we need that forum, and thanks for organizing this. In terms of all of the other recommendations that you said, such as recruitment, very important, performance appraisal, bottom-up feedback, communication training, we tend to agree with all of them. And the 360 appraisals of the senior managers as well as the leaders, I think it's a must. And I can send you all of our submissions throughout the years that actually could be useful to this sort of conversation in the future. Thank you.
Thank you, and very appropriate for the staff union to have the last word. And I'm very sorry that I have to stop, but we were on a strict instruction to end now. I would like to thank everyone in the audience online. We will continue this conversation. Thank you.